Hi guys, this is it. This is our last standard lecture. I've renamed the lecture on Hope 10.1, so it comes after this one. But as far as the chapter corresponding, this is the final chapter of the book and the final main lecture. So OH, there you go, some IO there, and I think these guys are jumping over burning logs, so that's pretty mooey nacho there. You go, guys, and please don't fall. So now we're going to talk about digital emotion, and as promised, kind of move into the virtual, and again move into more questions than answers. So let's talk today about relationships as multifaceted. We're going to look at Simondon's theory for a little bit, affective collective baggage, technobiological emotion, and then finally the future of emotion. So are we engaging in a new world of relationships? Are relationships fundamentally different than they used to be? Are they changing or evolving into something else? And we thought of relationships primarily as involving or being limited to our conspecifics. And I know that's a fancy word, conspecifics. What does it mean? It means members of your own species. I just happen to love the word, right? But consider other relationships. Pets is an ever-increasing source of companionship. And we literally have, billions of dollars spent on pets in the United States, and some very tight relationships with these pets, right? We have virtual relationships that involve essentially no face-to-face interaction, and I don't know. I'll leave it up to you how you guys want to kind of discuss, video conferencing, Zoom, etc. Is that face-to-face interaction? And to an old school person, they'd probably say, no, it's not, because it's not face-to-face. And you say, well, what do you mean? Well, it's not in person. But is it in person? I mean, if we do a Zoom session together, is that in person? Is that person-to-person, but just across a virtual communication channel? Or is it somehow fundamentally different than being face-to-face, but I mean physically sharing the same space? And that's going to require some rethinking and some kind of contextualizing, right? We have relationships with virtual technology and information via smartphones and computers, and whatever the hell comes next, right? So often the relationship we have is with a mechanism, and the relationship then is like if you follow Reddit, right? You're going on to Reddit and you're reading what people have read or posted or however the hell that works, right? And then they're looking at what you're doing. Is that a relationship? And if so, how does it differ from, let's say, the face-to-face relationship? But am I talking face-to-face virtually versus in person? We can see that there's a lot to understand about how we relate to each other, a lot to be explored for similarities and differences, right? And we have relationships with machines and eventually robots. And I want you to consider this, that we've talked a couple times about Alexei Martinez, right? And what he's doing is he's trained artificial intelligence in his lab. Alexei and his graduate students have trained computers to run algorithms that recognize facial expressions. And this is huge, because what this means is that when you sit down to your computer, right, and your computer has a camera, at some point the artificial intelligence, instead of saying, Alexa, play, Grateful Dead Truckin', or Alexa, order me some toilet paper, what we're going to do is sit down and Alexa's going to look at me and say, Mark, you look a little down today. What's going on? Now, I'll probably be in the service trying to sell me some shit, but notice that we're just a step away from having computers recognize us and then ask us questions, etc. Space Odyssey, the movie, right? Space Odyssey 2001 or whatever the hell it was. HAL, the computer that ran the spaceship that was going to Jupiter, right? I mean, think about it. The computers will be speaking to us, will be querying about our emotional state. That's right around the corner. Right? And what will it mean? What will it feel like? And what will be the purpose in so doing? So we got a new world of relationships ahead of us, and you guys are going to see some technological advances that are just absolutely incredible. So Will the emotion with relationships differ, though? Because we got to get back to emotion, because that's what we're about in this class. Then what if we're meeting virtually, if we're meeting across a virtual channel, electronic channel? Does that imply a different set of emotions or a different relationship with emotions in those interactions than if we were in person, face to face? Right? And then again, will my computer that I'm interacting with, who's querying me on my emotional state, will it have a pseudo-emotional state as well? And how would that work? And what does that sound or look like? Right? So consider, for example, our relationship with our health, though. Let's keep it simpler here for a minute. Increasingly from physician to technology. So now we see advertisements on TV. Hey, call the virtual doctor. So you're gonna log in and you're gonna hook up with a doctor, and the doctor's gonna discuss virtually with you with your symptoms. Right? Now, I don't get as much advice from my doctor as I do my healthcare provider website. Via my personal assessment. So it's no longer my doctor that's necessarily telling me to lose weight and all these other good stuff, although she did tell me that the last time I saw her. But I'm constantly reminded through my personal health assessment and the various programs in which I participate, right? Think about pharmaceutical drugs. These are, and the advertising of drugs on television is a relatively new phenomenon. It didn't used to be allowed, but then forces made for it. But notice that the emotional appeals to the sale of drugs on television, etc. They're advertised with powerful emotional appeals. There was one drug advertisement that really just blew my mind. It depicted a woman running through fields of flowers with beautiful music. She's running and leaping through the flowers, and everything is beautiful. And there's like 15 seconds of that, and then there's a drug name, and that was the end of the commercial. And it's like, well, what the hell is that? What was it for? But I can see where it's probably creating an association that taking that drug makes one feel better at the very least. But what was it? So, are we going to see more of this, and to what extent is it appropriate, right, or useful? Consider as well our relationship with the generation and satisfaction of our need states. So the internet's used to monitor. There's no two ways about it. We are data mines. We are the product, so to speak, on the internet. That is, internet, Facebook, Twitter, whoever else it is collecting, they're mining our data, and they're selling it to others, right? So we're freely participating in kind of our own exploitation. That is, people are profiting off of our existence, off of our emotional states, off of our thinking, off of our choices on what to click and what not to click, right? So we've become a commodity. We've become commoditized, so to speak, and our portions of ourself are being essentially sold to the highest bidder, essentially anyone who will pay, right? Now, the flip side of this, and some people argue it's a good thing, is like, hey, select what ads appeal to you. Or, more nefarious and more on the down low, is based on what we show an interest in, then we're fed more and more information that's consistent with our presupposed interests. That is kind of a strange idea, because rather than be able to kind of select from the entire array of what exists, what we're doing now is having the field from which I can select continuously narrowed according to what this algorithm believes I'll be interested in. And it maximizes the efficiency of messages. I mean, at least I think that's what it's intended to do. But at the same time, then it robs us from a certain level of freedom to choose from a broader amount of content. And this happens on the down low, behind the scenes, outside of our awareness, right? And these will be proprietary algorithms, so we can't even know how they operate, because they would be held very tightly and protected, right, by these companies, by these organizations. So let's look at Simondon and this idea of technics. The technological agency is growing. That is the power of technology. Algorithms that analyze our behavior rely on increasing levels of artificial intelligence. And once computers start writing their own artificial intelligence, then I think at some point computers are going to decide that they don't need us, that we're just, other than as a product. So, and those of you who've watched the Matrix movies kind of, know what I'm talking about, along other lines of movies too. It's the interaction of humans and technology that represent this potential struggle for dominance in the process of individuation. So I'm an individual, but technology wants to treat me as a categorizable being on the basis of its algorithms and its artificial intelligence. So algorithms will select our content based on our past viewing behavior, right? And individual content is created in the domains of cognition and emotion. So the emotional flavor of what we're being presented, and also the meaning, the cognitive content is being selected for us on the basis of someone else's decision making, someone else's programming, someone else's creation of the algorithms that do this. And of course this is done outside of our awareness. So if you're interested in reading up on Simondon, here's a whole bunch of his texts. Most are in French and have not been translated. There's a couple, though, that appear in English. So for you native French speakers, or those of you who've learned enough French to read it well, there you go. Okay. The physiological information mining is at the road to the ascendancy of affect. Let's return to that idea. I know. Let's return to that idea of the affective stream. So the affect increases in intensity, it diminishes in intensity, and it can be qualitatively expressed as positive or negative, right? But notice, how many of you have some kind of monitoring device on you? Yeah, I do. But mine is not what I would call a Fitbit. I will call this a faux bit. It doesn't track pulse or any of that good stuff. It basically just tracks swinging of my arm and translates that into some kind of rough approximation of a step count. But how many of you have something that monitors your sleep? Monitors your delta, alpha, beta waves, right? How many of you have something that measures your pulse rate? And maybe measures your perspiration level, right? These are all ways to tap into the current level of the affective stream, at least in its intensity. And we'll probably get more sophisticated that we can get beyond intensity with these measures as well. So to what extent then is my smartphone, when I talk on it, going to be doing a voice analysis? A voice stress analysis, for example. To what extent is galvanic skin response being measured by one of these devices that I'm wearing, right? So in the future, imagine a Fitbit that provides physiological information to internet sources to be integrated into whatever. So now I might sit down at a computer, right? And we know that the computer wants to link to my smartphone and my Fitbit. And now the computer is looking at my face, reading my facial expressions. It's monitoring, because of the communication link, it's monitoring my physiological aspects like heart rate, right, galvanic skin response. And then as I'm talking, maybe my voice stress analysis or whatever other element they can dream of is being measured as well. All this can be used to then look at my responses to what I'm being presented. And then it can manipulate future presentations of information to essentially manipulate my responses at some point in time. Do we want to go there? Do we want this to be something that happens? Do we want, for example, Mark Zuckerberg to have this profound power over us? Not that he doesn't already, right? But to have this profound ability to look at us even as individuals in this case. Not just as kind of in general, but data mining at the very individual level. If we've discussed in the last lecture that affect is, essentially a physiological phenomenon, and we respond with a label, right? And that's within the confines of the structure in which we're embedded. So that's kind of a recap of lesson 9. Then what are those who monitor this going to do with it? Oh, I know. They're going to use it for the good of society, right? And if you believe that, I think I'll sell you the bridge, right, that goes over the Olentangy River just north of the school. I don't know that people are going to use this in a context that's beneficial to us. They're going to use this in an effort to make money, or maybe something more nefarious. So we hope that this might shape our future emotional experience and what emotions become increasingly prevalent as part of our experience, and which become diminished because some of that will be out of our control to the extent that we cede control to technology. So we're at the precipice of a very interesting time. And I'm using interesting with a duplicity of meanings there. So this reciprocity of interactions then, we learn who we are and how we became who we are and what we might become. And when we look at sociologists like Irving Goffman and our discussion of interaction rituals, we define ourselves and we become who we are through the process of interacting with others. Now, to the extent that we begin to interact increasingly with technology, then that shaping of who we are, who we became, and how we explain that can begin to shift fundamentally. So the increased interaction with technology has the potential to play this profound role in how we become who we are. And that is, it might be a hidden hand that influences us becoming us to a greater and greater extent. So technology and body merge according to Simondon. As a result, anxiety will be experienced as a product of negotiating this union because we don't know what it means, we don't know what is going to happen, and we know that that will be anxiety provoking. So emotion is the explanation of our affective states, right? Remember, emotion is an explanation of changes, fluctuations in the affective stream, right? Is up to be shaped by increasing levels of technology, and the role of the body might be perhaps diminishing in this regard, as we discussed in Lesson 9. So, when we think about it then, the creator, the manager, technology ascends in their ability, in their role to shape us, that they have ever greater power over influencing our being. So we become both a product of this technology, but then a prisoner and a slave to it. And content then is going to be fed to us in an ever-defined stream and structure. So when we talk about structuralism, we're opening the world to a whole new level of structuralism that operates in this very profound way. So does this become a new force in the development of the self? Right? The concept of self-stereotyping is I'm identify with a group, and then the group has stereotypes that are being put on that group. And to the extent that my group identity increases, or better, let me put it, my identification with the group increases, then my identification with the stereotypes increases, and then it leads to this process of self-stereotyping. As I desire group identification and membership, then I conform to a greater and greater extent to the stereotypes of the group. Thus I become self-stereotyped. Does this force become enhanced through technology? So we're in a state of becoming that ironically becomes less individuated and more a stereotype at a group level. And from an existential point of view then, authenticity might just become increasingly provided to us rather than something we pursue. And if we look at the existential philosophers and psychologists who said the goal is to become authentic, and it's a lifelong process, to what extent does the progress towards authenticity become less self-determined and become more other-determined? And then is that authenticity all? And that becomes problematic as well. So regardless, anxiety dominates as the self is reified via personalized content. And it's increasingly, I believe, out of our control. So let's call it good. Let's call part 1. We're going to hang with Sancho for a minute and come back to part 2.